All the Sounds of the Rainbow by Norman Spinrad. Harry Krell sprawled in a black vinyl beanbag chair near the railing of the rough-hewn porch. 5 yards below, the sea crashed and rumbled against convoluted black rocks that looked like a fallen shower of meteors half buried in the warm Pacific sand. He was naked from the waist up. A white sarong fell to his shins, and he wore custom-made horsehide sandals. He was well-muscled in a 40-ish way, deeply tanned, and had the long, neat, straight yellow hair of a beach bum. His blue eyes almost went with the beach bum image, clear, empty, but shattered-looking, like marbles that had been carefully cracked with a ball-peen hammer. As phony as a Southern California guru, Bill Marvin thought as he stepped out onto the sunlit porch. Which he is. Nevertheless, Marvin shuddered as those strange eyes swept across him like radar antennae, cold, expressionless instruments gathering their private spectrum of data. "Sit down," Krell said. "You sound awful over there." Marvin gingerly lowered the seat of his brown suede pants to the edge of an aluminum and plastic beach chair, and they stared at Krell with cold gray eyes set in a smooth, angular face perfectly framed by medium-length, razor-cut, artfully styled brown hair. He had no intention of wasting any more time on this oily con man than was absolutely necessary. "I'll come right to the point, Krell," he said. "You detach yourself from Karen your way, or I'll get it done my way." "Karen's her own chick," Krell said. "She's not even your wife anymore." A jet from Vandenberg suddenly roared overhead. Krell winced and rubbed at his eyes. "But I'm still paying her $1,000 a month in alimony, and I'll play pretty dirty before I'll stand by and watch half of that go into your pockets." Krell smiled, and a piece of chalk seemed to scratch down a blackboard in Marvin's mind. "You can't do a thing about it," he said. "I can stop paying." "And get dragged into court?" "I'll tell the judge I'm putting the money in escrow pending the outcome of a sanity hearing, seeing as how I believe that Karen is now mentally incompetent." "It won't work. Karen's at least as sane as you are." "But I'll drag you into court in the process, Krell. I'll expose you for the phony you are." Harvey Krell laughed a strange, bitter laugh, and multicolored diamonds of stained glass seemed to flash and shimmer in the sun. "Shall I show you what a phony I am, Marvin?" he said. "Shall I really show you?" Waves of thick velvet poured over Bill Marvin's body. In Krell's direction, he felt a radiant fire in a bitter cold night. He heard a chord that seemed to be composed of the chiming of a million microscopic bells. Far away, he saw a streak of hard blue metal against a field of loamy brown. All in an instant, and then it passed. He saw the sunlight, heard the breakers, then the sound of a high-performance engine accelerating up in the hills that loomed above the beach house. Krell was smiling and staring emptily off into space. A tremor went through Marvin's body. "I've been a little tense lately," he thought. Could this be the beginning of a breakdown? "What the hell was that?" he muttered. "What was what?" said Krell. "I'm a phony, so nothing could have happened now, could it, Marvin?" His voice seemed both bitter and smug. Marvin blotted out the whole thing by forcing his attention back to the matter at hand. "I don't care what little tricks you can pull. I'm not going to let you suck up my money through Karen." "You've got a one-track mind, Mr. Marvin. What we call a frozen sensorium here at the Golden Groves. You're super uptight. You know, I could help you. I could open up your head and let in all the sounds of the rainbow." "You're not selling me any used car, Krell." "Well, maybe Karen can," Krell said. Marvin followed Krell's line of sight, and there she was, walking through the glass doors in a paisley muumuu that the sea breeze pressed and fluttered against the soft firmness of her body. A ball of nausea instantly formed in Marvin's gut, compounded of empty nights, catfights in court, soured love, dead hopes, and the treachery of his body, which still sent ghosts of lust coursing to his loins at the sight of the dyed coppery hair that fell a foot past her shoulders, that elfin face with carbon steel behind it, that perfect body which she pampered and honed like the weapon it was. "Hello, Bill," she said in a neutral voice. "How's the smut business?" "I haven't had to do any porn for 4 months," Marvin lied. "I'm into commercials." And then, hating himself for trying to justify his existence to her again, even now, when there was nothing to gain or lose. Karen walked slowly to the railing of the porch, leaned her back against it, seemed to quiver in some kind of ecstasy. Her green eyes, always so bright with shrewdness, seemed vague and uncharacteristically soft, as if she were good and stoned. "Your voice feels so ugly when you're trying not to whine," she said. "Bill's threatening to cut off your alimony unless you leave Golden Groves," Krell said. "He wants to force a sanity hearing to prove that you're a nut and I'm a crook." "Go ahead and pull your greasy little stunts, Bill," Karen said. "I'm sane, and Harry is exactly what he claims to be, and we'd both be delighted to prove it in court, wouldn't we, Harry?" "I don't want to get involved in any legal hassles," Krell said coldly. "It's not worth it, especially since you won't have a dime to pay towards your residency fee with all your alimony in escrow." "Harry!" Her eyes snapped back into hard focus like steel shutters, and the desperation turned her face into the kind of ugly mask you see around swimming pools in Las Vegas. Marvin smiled, easily choking back his pity. "How do you like your little guru now?" he said. "Harry, you can't do this to me. You can't just turn me off like a lamp over a few $100s. Harry Krell climbed out of his beanbag chair. There was no expression on his face at all, except for those strange, shattered-looking eyes. He could have been any aging beach bum telling the facts of his life to an old divorcee whose money had run out. "I'm no saint," he said. "I had an accident that scrambled my brains and gave me a power to give people something they want and fixed it so that's the only way I can make a living. A good living." He smiled, and the broken glass seemed to jangle inside Bill Marvin's skull. "I'm in it for the money," said Harry Krell. "So you better clean up your own mess, Karen." "You're such a rotten swine," Karen snarled, her face suddenly looking 10 years older, every subtle wrinkle a prophet of the disaster to come. "But I'm the real thing," said Harry Krell. "I deliver." Slowly and haltingly, he began walking toward the doors that led to his living room, like someone moving underwater. "Bill!" It was all there in his name on her lips, 2 octaves lower than her normal tone of voice. The slight hunch forward of her shoulders, the lost, scared look in her eyes. It was a trick, and it was where she really lived, both at the same time. He wanted to punch her in the guts and cradle her in his arms. "If you're crazy enough to think you're going to talk me—" "Just let me walk you to your car, please." Marvin got up, brushed off his pants, sighed, and suddenly drained of anything like emotion, said tiredly, "If you think you need the exercise that bad, lady." They walked silently through a slick California rustic living room, where Krell sat on a green synthetic fur-covered couch, stroking a Siamese cat as if it were a musical instrument. On either side of him were a young male hippie in carefully cut shoulder-length hair and a well-tailored, embroidered jeans suit, and a minor middle-aged television actor whose name Marvin could not recall. Marvin kept walking across the black rug without exchanging a look or a word with Krell, but he noticed there was a quick eye contact between Krell and Karen, and at that moment he felt the fleeting taste of cinnamon in his mouth. Krell's private house fronted on a rich, rolling green plateau across the highway from the Pacific end of the Santa Monica Mountains. Rustic bungalows were scattered randomly about the property, along with clumps of trees, paths, benches, a tennis court, a large swimming pool, a sauna, a stable, the usual sensitivity resort paraphernalia. The parking lot was tucked nicely away behind a screen of trees at the edge of the highway, so as to not spoil the bucolic scene. But the whole business was surrounded by a 10-foot chain-link fence topped by 3 strands of barbed wire, and the only entrance was a remotely controlled electric gate. As far as Marvin was concerned, that pretty well summed up Golden Groves. This area north of Los Angeles was full of this kind of guru farm. The only thing that varied was the basic gimmick. "All right, Karen, what's Krell's number?" he said as they walked toward the parking lot. "Let me guess. Organic mescaline combined with acupuncture, tantric yoga, and yak butter massage. Ye gods, what else is there that you haven't been hung up on already?" "Synesthesia," she said in deadly earnest. And it works. You felt it yourself. I could tell. Uneasily, Marvin remembered the strange moments of sensory hallucination he had been getting ever since he met Krell. Like short LSD flashbacks. Was Krell really responsible, he wondered? Better than turning out to be the results of too much acid, or the beginning of a nervous breakdown. Harry had some kind of serious head injury 3 years ago. Probably fell off his surfboard. He was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when he came out of it, the lines between his senses and his brain were all crossed. He saw sound, heard color, tasted temperature. Synesthesia, they call it. Yeah, now I remember. I read about that kind of thing in Time or somewhere. Not like Harry, you didn't, because with Harry the connections keep changing from minute to minute. His world is always fresh and new, like being high all the time, it's like nothing else in the world. She brought him up short with a touch of her hand and a flash from her eyes, perhaps deliberate. Reminded him of what she had been, what they had been when they first drove across the San Fernando Valley in the old Dodge, with the Hollywood Hills spread out before them, a golden world they were sure to conquer. I feel alive again, Bill, she said. Please don't take it away from me. I don't see... Overwhelming warmth enveloped his body. He tasted the wine of her hand on his arm. He heard the symphony of the spheres, tone within tone within tone without end. He saw the dark of inky night punctuated with fountains of green, red, violet, yellow, fantastic flowers of light, celestial fireworks. He felt his knees go weak, his head reel. He was falling. The fountains of light exploded faster, became larger. He put out his hands to break his fall, smelled burning pine, heard the whisper of an unfelt wind. He was crouched on the grass, supporting his body weight on his hands, staring down at the green blades. Are you okay? Are you all right? Karen shouted. He looked up at her, blinked, nodded. What Harry never let the doctors find out was that he could project it, she said. Marvin got shakily to his feet. All right, he said. So I believe that greasy creep Krell can get inside your brain and scramble it around. But what the hell for? What dumb spiel does he throw to make you want it? That you're experiencing the essence of Buddha's rectum or something? Harry's no mental giant, she said. He doesn't know why it opens you up. Oh, he's got some stupid line for the real idiots. All he really knows is how to do it, and how to make money at it. But Bill, I can tell you that this seems to be opening me up at last. It's the answer I've been looking for 5 years. What the hell's the question? Marvin said, an old line that brought back a whole marriage's worth of bad memories, like a foul-tasting burp recalling an undigested bad meal. Acid trips that went nowhere, 2 months of the synonym game. Learning how to stick the knife in the better, swinging threesomes both ways. Trial separations and trial reconciliations, savage sex, battle sex, dull sex, and no sex. Always searching for something that had been lost somewhere, between crossing the continent together in that old red Dodge and the skin-flick way of life that meant survival in Los Angeles after it became apparent that he wasn't the next Orson Welles and she wasn't the next Marilyn Monroe. What I think is that this synesthesia must be the natural way people are supposed to experience the world. Somewhere along the way, our senses got separated from each other, and that's why the human race is such a mess. We can't get our heads together because we experience reality through a lot of narrow windows, like prisoners in a cell. That's why we're all twisted inside. Whereas Krell is the picture of mental health and karmic perfection. They were nearing the parking lot now. Marvin could see his Targa, and he longed to be in it, roaring along the freeway from Golden Groves and Karen, away from one more expensive last hope. Once again, she presented him with her flesh, touching both hands to his shoulders, staring full face at him until something inside him ached with yearning. Her face was as soft as it had been when they had been lovers instead of sparring partners. but her eyes were full of an aging woman's terrors. "All I know is what I feel," she said. "When I'm living in a synesthetic flash, I feel really alive. Everything else is just waiting." "Why don't you try smack?" Marvin said. "It may not be cheaper than Krell, but at least it's portable." "Harry claims that eventually we can learn to do it on our own, that he can retrain our minds given enough time." "And enough money." "Oh, Bill, don't make me lose this. Don't let me drown." Her hands dug into his shoulders. Her body slumped toward him. Wrinkles formed in the corners of her mouth. The stench of pathetic desperation. He saw huge women's hands, knotted in fear, raise themselves in prayerful supplication towards him from a forest of sharp metallic edges. He felt her flesh moving over every inch of his body in long-forgotten personal rhythms, and how it felt to snuggle Toasty beside her in bed. He tasted bitter gall and the nausea of panic, smelled musky perfume. He heard his old tears pealing like church bells as they rolled down his cheeks. He drew the giant hands to him, and they dissolved into an armful of yellow light. Wordless singing filled his ears, and he smelled a long night by the fireside, felt the fleshy warm glow of nostalgia's sad contentment. He was holding Karen in his arms. Her cheek was nestled against his neck. She was crooning his name, and he felt 5 years and more younger, and suddenly scared silly and burning mad. He thrust her away from him. "It won't work," he snarled. "You're not going to play me for a sucker again, and neither is Krell." "You felt what you and Harry Krell wanted me to feel." "Forget it. It won't work again. See you in court." He sprinted the rest of the way to his car, tearing little divots out of the moist turf of Golden Groves. With 4 underground films totaling less than 90 minutes to Bill's credit, and with Karen having starred in at least 2 of them, the Marvins had left New York to seek fame and fortune in the Golden West. What they found in Hollywood was that beautiful women with minor acting talent were a dime a dozen, or at best $50 a trick, and that Bill's credits might as well have been Cuban Superman flicks. What they also found out, after 4 months of starving and scrounging, was that Los Angeles was the pornography capital of the world. For every foot of feature film shot in Hollywood, there were miles of Split Beaver, S&M, and just plain stag films churned out. The town was swarming with filmmakers, living off porn while waiting for the big break, and actresses whose footage could be seen to best advantage in rotary smokers, or the string of skinflick houses along Santa Monica Boulevard known as Beaver Valley. Porn was such a booming industry that most of the filmmakers knew less about handling a camera than Bill. So when the inevitable occurred, he had plenty of work, and the Marvins had an abundance of money. 7 years later, Bill Marvin was left with his excellent connections in the porn industry, a 3-year-old Porsche Targa, a 6-room house in Laurel Canyon, which he would own outright in another 15 years, enough cameras and equipment to live well off pornography forever, and no more illusions about making it big. He was set for life. Sex, both instant and long-term, was certainly no problem in his line of work. 4 months of screwing around between serious relationships that averaged about 6 months in duration seemed to be his natural pattern. In the porn business, you connect up with a good lawyer and a tricky accountant early if you know what's good for you. So he had come out of the divorce pretty damn well. $15,000 in lieu of her share of the house, and $1,000 a month, which he could pay without feeling too much pain. He had felt that he could breeze along like this forever, happy as a clam, until that last scene at Golden Groves. Now he was rattling around the house as if it were a dead shell of some enormous creature that he was inhabiting like an overambitious hermit crab. He couldn't get his head into a new project. Sex didn't turn him on. Drugs bored him. He could think of only one thing, Harry Krell's head on a silver platter. And the fact that his lawyer had told him that the sanity hearing ploy probably wouldn't work certainly hadn't improved his disposition. What possible difference can it make to me that Karen is throwing my money away on Krell, he wondered, as he paced the flagstone walk of his deeply shadowed, overgrown garden. If it wasn't Krell, it'd be some other transcendental con man. The hills are full of them. If this were a universal TV remote, I'd still be carrying a subconscious torch for Karen, which is why Krell is getting under my skin. Guru envy, a shrink might call it. But I wouldn't have Karen back on her hands and knees. No, it's got to be something about the crazy creep Krell. That crazy Krell. Bill Marvin did a classic slow take. Then he double-timed through the ferns and cacti of his hillside garden, trotted around the edge of his pool, through his living room, and 2 stairs at a time up to his second-floor office, where he called Wally Brunner, his hotshot lawyer. Look, Wally, about this con artist, my wife is... I told you miss one alimony payment and she'll have you in court as a defendant. And unless you succeed in getting her committed... Yeah, I know. I probably can't have her declared incompetent. But what about Krell? Krell? Wally's voice had slowed down about 20 miles per hour. Marvin could picture him leaning back in his chair, raising his eyebrows, rolling the word around in his mouth, tasting it out. Krell? Sure. This guy had a head injury so serious he was in a coma for weeks. And when he comes out of it, he claims he sees sound, hears light, feels taste, and then he goes into business claiming he can scramble other people's brains the same way. What would that sound like in court? Who swears out the complaint? Brunner said slowly. Huh? The only way to get Krell into court is on a fraud charge. Then he can't really project this synesthesia effect. He's swindling the marks. That puts him in the position of having to defend himself against criminal fraud by proving he's got this strange psychic power, which, let me tell you, is not a position I'd care to defend. If I was his lawyer, I'd think to have him plead insanity to try to beat the felony rap. If he wins, he spends a few months in the booby hatch, and this Golden Groves thing is broken up, which is what you want. If he loses, he goes to jail, which you'd like even better. If he tries to convince a Los Angeles judge that he's got psychic powers, he won't even get to first base. And if he tries it before a jury, I'll get him and his lawyer thrown in the funny farm. Well, hey, that's great, Marvin shouted. We got him coming and going. Like I say, Bill, Brunner said tiredly, who's the complainant? In English, please, Wally. In order to get Krell into court on a fraud charge, someone has to file a complaint. Someone who can claim that Krell has defrauded him. Therefore, someone who has paid Krell money for his hypothetical services. Who's that, Bill? Certainly not Karen. What about me? Marvin blurted. You? Sure. I go up there, pay Krell for a month's worth, stay a few days, and then come out screaming fraud. But according to you, he really delivers what he claims to. As of now, I never told you that, right? You'd have to testify under oath. I'll keep my fingers crossed. You really think Krell will take a chance on letting you in? Bill Marvin smiled. He's a greedy pig and an egomaniac, he said. He tried to get Karen to help convince me he was the Malibu's answer to Buddha, and he's more than jerk enough to convince himself that he succeeded. Will it work, Wally? Will what work? Brunner said ingenuously. As of now, this phone conversation never took place. Do you read me loud and clear? 5 by 5, Marvin said. He hung up on Brunner and dialed the number of Golden Groves. Sprawled across his green couch, Harry Krell's body contradicted the lines of tense shrewdness in his face as his eyes, for once focused sharply on Marvin. Maybe I'm making a mistake trusting you, he said. You made it pretty clear what you think of me. Marvin leaned back in his chair, emulating Krell's casualness. Trust's got nothing to do with it, he said. You don't have to trust me, and I don't have to trust me. You show me that you can give me my money's worth. That should convince me that Karen is getting my money worth, too. Turn me down, and it's $1,000 a month you stand to lose. Harry Krell laughed, and microscopic pinpricks seemed to tickle every inch of Marvin's body. Beside Krell on the sofa, Karen's body quivered once. We don't like each other, Krell said, but we understand each other. There was something patronizing in his tone that grated on Marvin, an arrogant overconfidence that was somehow insulting. Well, the greedy swine would soon get what was his. Then it's a deal? Sure, Krell said. Come back tomorrow with your clothes and a $500 check that won't bounce. You get a cabin, 3 meals a day in the house, free use of the sauna, the tennis courts, and the pool. At least 2 synesthesia groups a day, and whatever special events might go on. The horses are $5 an hour extra. I'm paying for the 2 of us, Marvin said. I should get some kind of discount. Krell grinned. You want to share a cabin with Karen? I'll knock off $250 a month of the bill, he said. There was something teasing in his voice. Involuntarily, Marvin's eyes were drawn to Karen's. There was an emotional flash between them that brought back long-dead memories of that kind of eye contact and what it had once meant, of what they had been together before it all fell apart. He found himself almost wishing he was what he pretended to be, a pilgrim seeking to clean the stale cobwebs out of his soul. He had the feeling that she just might agree to shack up with him, but the glow in her eyes was forced by desperate need. Los Angeles was full of faces like that, and the hairy Krells sucked them dry and let them shrivel like old prunes when the money ran out. He had to admit that his body still felt something for Karen's, but he was long past the point where he'd let sex drag him where his head didn't want to be. The going up was just not worth the coming down. Pass, he said. Karen's expression did not change at all. Krell got up, shrugged, and walked out onto the porch in that strange, uncertain gait of his, inhaling sharply as he crossed the shadow line into the sunlight. I know you're up to something cheap and tricky, Karen said. Then why did you agree to warm up Krell for me? You wouldn't believe me. Try me. She sighed. Because I still care a little for you, Bill, she said. You're so frozen, so tied up in knots inside. And who should know what it's like better than me? Harry is what you need. Once you've been here a while, you'll see that, and it won't matter why you originally came. Saving your alimony had nothing to do with it, of course. Not really, she said, and as the words emerged from her mouth, they became brightly colored tropical butterflies, and she became a lush greenness from which they flew. There was a soft musical trilling, and the smell of lilacs and orchids filled the air. In that moment, he felt a pang of regret for what he had said. He saw the feeling she still bore for him, heard the simple clarity of her body's animal love. In the next moment, they were staring at each other, and tension hung in the air between them. Karen broke it with a small, smug, Madonna smile. Marvin found himself sweating at the palms, and somewhat leery of what he was getting himself into. The cabin was sure a dump for $500 a month. A bed, a dresser, a couch, a bathroom, 2 electric heaters, and a noisy old motel-type air conditioner. Breakfast had been granola, 69 cents a pound, milk, and coffee. And Marvin figured that Krell would use the same health food excuse to dish out cheap dinners and lunches. The only thing that required expensive upkeep was the riding stable, and that ran at a profit as a separate operation. Krell must be pocketing something like half the residency fee as clear profit. 15 cabins, some of them double occupancy. That would be $7,000 a month at least. There's no business like the guru business, Marvin thought, as he followed Krell and his three of his fellow residents out onto the porch above the rumbling sea. 4 large plush cushions had been placed on the bare wood in a circle around an even larger zebra-striped pillow. Krell, in his white sarong, lowered himself to the central position in a semblance of the lotus position, looking like the Maharishi as played by a decaying tab hunter. Marvin and the other 3 residents dropped their cushions in imitation of Krell. On Marvin's left was Tish Connolly, a well-preserved 35-ish ex-Las Vegas showgirl who had managed to hold on to a decent portion of the drunk money that she had swirled around her for 10 years, and who had eyed him a couple of times over the granola. On his right, Mike Warren, the long hair he had seen on the first day, was turned out to be an ex-Speed Freak guitarist, and on the far cushion, a balding TV producer named Marty Klein, whose last 2 series had been cancelled after 13 weeks each. Okay, said Krell. You all know Bill Marvin, so I guess we're ready to charge up for the morning. Bill, what this is about is that I unfreeze everybody's senses together for a bit, and then you'll have synesthetic flashes on your own off it for a few hours. The more of these sessions you have, the longer your own free flashing will last. And finally, your senses will be re-educated enough so that you don't need me. How many people have graduated so far? Marvin asked sweetly. To his credit, Krell managed not to crack a scowl. "No one's felt they've gotten all that I've got to give them yet," he said. "But some are far along the way. Okay, are we ready now?" The morning sun had just about burned away most of the early coastal fog, but traces of mist still lingered around the front porch, freshened by the spray, churned up by the ocean as it broke against the rocks below. "Here we go," said Harry Krell. There was light, a soft, all-enveloping radiance that pulsed from the sunshine yellow to sea green with the tidal rhythm of breakers crashing against a rocky shore. Marvin tasted a salty tang, now a minty cool, now chowder hot. To his right, he heard a thin, throbbing blues-like chord, something like a keening amplified guitar stretching and clawing for some spiritual stratosphere. Higher, 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 but never quite getting there, never resolving the dynamic discord into a bearable harmony. To his left, a sound like the easy Ricky tick of a funky old piano that had been out of tune for years and had mellowed into that strange old groove. Across from him, a frantic, syncopated tickling like a time bomb running down as it was running out. A toss-up as to whether entropy would outrace the explosion, and dominating it all, the central theme, a surging, blaring, brassy wailing that seemed a shell of plastic around a central motif of sadness, a gypsy violinist playing hot jazz on a tuba that Marvin knew was Harry Krell. Marvin was knocked back on his mental heels by the flood of transmogrified emotions pouring in on him from unexpected sensual directions. He sensed that in some way Mike Warren was that screaming non-chord that was the oral transformation of his visual persona, that Tish Connolly was the funky Ricky tick, and Klein's running down rhythm, a has-been wondering whether he would fall apart or freak out first. And Krell, phony brass within sad confusion, within cheap pseudo-sincerity, within a mournful regret, within inner emptiness, like a Muzak version of himself, a man whose existence was in the unreasonable tension between his grubby phoniness and the overwhelming rich strangeness of the unique consciousness a random hit on the head had given him, grandeur poured by fate into the tawdriest available vessel. Marvin had never felt pressed so close to human beings in his life. He was both fascinated and repelled by the intimacy, and wondered what they were experiencing as him. Then the universe of his senses went through another transformation. His mouth was filled with a spectrum of tastes that somehow spread themselves out along spatial dimensions. Acrid spiciness like smoked chili peppers to the right, soft furriness of flat highballs to the left, off away something like garlic and peptic gall, and everywhere the overwhelming taste of peppermint and melancholy red wine. He could hear the pounding of the surf now, but what he saw was a field of orange-red across which drifted occasional wisps of cool blue. "Now join hands in a circle and feel outsides with your insides," said the plastic peppermint and musky red wine. Marvin reached out with both hands. The right half of his body immediately became knotted with severe muscular tension, every nerve twanging to the breaking point like snarled and taut wire. But the left half of his body went slack, soft, and quietly burned out as 4 a.m. in a bedside, someone you picked up a little after midnight at a heavy boozing and doping party. "Okay, now relax and drift on back through the changes," said peppermint and red wine. Sight became a flickering sequence, blue mists drifting across a field of orange-red, sunshine yellow pulsing through sea green in a tidal rhythm. 4 people seated in a circle around Harry Krell on a sunlit porch. Back and forth, in and out, the visions chased each other through every possible variation of the sequence, while Marvin heard the pounding of the surf, the symphony of 4 souls, tasted minty cool, chowder hot, smoked chili peppers, flat highballs, peppermint, and red wine. The sensual images crossed and recrossed, blending, clashing, melding, bouncing off of each other, until concepts like taste, sight, hearing, smell, feel became totally meaningless. Finally, time had no reference in this state. Marvin's sensorium stabilized. He saw Tish Connolly, Mike Warren, Marty Klein, and himself seated on the cushions in a circle around Harry Krell on a sunlit wooden porch. He heard the crashing of the surf on the rocks below, felt the softness of the cushion on which he sat, smelled a mixture of sea breeze and his own sweat. Krell was bathed in sweat, looked drained, but managed to smile smugly in his direction. The others appeared not quite as dazed as Marvin felt. His mind was completely empty in that moment, whited out, overwhelmed, nothing more than the brain center where his sensory input merged to form his sensorium. That constellation of sight, smell, sound, taste, touch, and feel, which is the essential and basic ground of human consciousness. I hope you weren't disappointed, Mr. Marvin, Krell said. Or would you like your money back? Bill Marvin had nothing to say. He felt that he had hardly enough self-consciousness to perceive words as more than abstract sequences of sound. The bright afternoon sun turned the surface of the pool into a rippling sheet of glare, which seemed to dissolve into glass chiming and smashing for a moment as Marvin stared at the incandescent waters. Even his normal senses seemed unusually acute. He could clearly smell the sea in the stables. Even here at poolside, feel the grainy texture of the plastic cloth of the beach chair against his bare back, perhaps because he could no longer take any sensory dimension for granted, with his synesthetic flashes he was getting every few minutes. There was no getting around the fact that what he'd experienced that morning had been a profound experience, and one that still sent echoes rippling through his brain. Karen pulled herself out of the pool with a shake and a shudder that flashed droplets in the sun, threw a towel around herself, and plopped down in the beach chair next to his. She was wearing a minimal blue bikini, but Marvin found himself noticing the full curves of her body only as abstract design, glistening arcs of water-sheen skin. I can see you had a really moving session, she said. Huh? He saw that her eyes were looking straight at him, but in a glazed, unfocused manner. I'm flashing right now, she said. I hear you as a low hum, without the usual grinding noises in the way you sit, and she ran her hand along his chest. Cool green and blue, no hard silvers and grays, she sighed, removed her hand, refocused her eyes. It's gone now, she said. All I get, unless Harry is really projecting, is little bits and pieces I can't hold on to. But someday you'll be able to stay high all the time, or so Krell claims. You know Harry's no fraud now. Marvin winced inwardly at the word fraud, thinking what it could be like testifying against Krell. Lord, he might drop me into a synesthetic trance in the middle of the courtroom, but I could fake my way through if I was ready for it, if I have enough experience functioning in that state. Krell seems to be able to function, and he's like that all the time. What's the matter, Bill? Does my body sound funny or something? He snapped. No, you just had a plain, old-fashioned, frightened look on your face for a minute there. I was thinking what it would be like if Krell really could condition you to be like him all the time, Marvin said. Walking around in a fog like that. Sure, I can see how it might make things interesting, but how could you function, even keep from walking into trees? Harry is like that all the time, and he's functioning. You don't exactly see him starving in the street. I'll bet you don't see him in the street, period, Marvin said. I'll bet Krell never leaves this place. The way you see him walking around like a zombie, he probably goes on memory lane half the time, like a blind man in his house. Yeah, he thought, people, food, money, he makes it all come to him. He probably couldn't drive a mile on the freeway or even walk across a street without getting killed. Suddenly Marvin found himself considering Harry Krell's inner reality, the strange parameters of his life, with a certain sympathy. What would it really be like to be Krell? To be wide open to all that fantastic experience, but unable to function in the real world except by somehow making it come to you. Making it come to you through a greasy con game, he told himself angrily, annoyed at the softness towards Krell that had sneaked into his consciousness, at the momentary blunting of the keen edge of his determination. Rising, he said, I'm going to take a dip and wash some of these cobwebs out of my head. He took 4 running steps and dove off the concrete lip of the pool. When he hit the water, the world exploded for a moment in a dazzling aural rainbow of light. How long have you been here? 6 weeks, said Trish Connolly, lighting a cigarette with a match that momentarily split the darkness of her cabin with a ringing gong in Bill Marvin's head. Another synesthetic flash. He had been at Golden Groves for only 3 days now, and the last session with Krell had been at least 5 hours ago, yet he was still getting 2 or 3 flashes an hour. He leaned back against the headboard of the bed, felt Tish's body exhale against him, and saw a glow of her cigarette flare brightly, then subside. How long do you think you'll stay? He asked. Till I have to go make some more money somehow, she said. This isn't the cheapest joint I've ever seen. Not until you graduate, become another Harry Krell? She laughed. He could feel her loose flesh ripple, almost see pink gelatin shaking in the dark. A flash? Or just overactive imagination? That's a con, she said. Take it from an expert. For one thing, there are people who have been in and out of here for months, and they still need their boosters from Harry to keep flashing. For another, Krell wouldn't turn you on permanently if he could. We wouldn't need him anymore then. Where would his money come from? Knowing that, you still stick around? Billy boy, I've kicked around for 10 years. I've been taken every way there is to be taken, took men everywhere there was for me to take 'em. Before I came here, I'd felt everything there was to feel 50,000 times. So no matter what I did to get off, I was just going through the motions. At least here I feel alive in bits and pieces. So I'm paying Krell a pretty penny for getting me off once in a while. I've made most of my money on the other end of the same game. So what the hell? It keeps the money in circulation, right? You're a mean old broad, Marvin said with a certain affection. She snubbed out her cigarette, kissed him lightly on the lips, rolled toward him. One more for the road, Billy boy? Diffidently, he took her tired flesh in his arms. Oh, you're golden, she sighed as she moved against him, and he realized that she had been hoping for a synesthetic flash to give her a bit of the sharp pleasure that he alone could not. But he could hardly feel anger or disgust, since he had been looking for something more spectacular than a soft human body in the darkness, too. Strolling towards his cabin near the sea cliffs in the full moonlight, Bill Marvin saw Harry Krell emerge from Lisa Scott's cabin and walk down the path towards him, more rapidly and surely than he usually seemed to move in broad daylight. They met in a small grove of trees where the moonlight filtered through the branches in tiger stripes of silver and black that shattered visual images into jigsaw patterns. Hello, Marvin, Krell said. Been doing some visiting? Just walking, Marvin said neutrally, surprising himself with his own desire to have a civil conversation with Krell. But after all, strictly as a curiosity, Krell had to be one of the most interesting men on Earth. Krell must have sensed something of this because he stopped, leaned up against a tree, and said, You've been here a week now, Marvin. Tell me the truth. Do you still hate my guts? Are you still out to get me? Glad to have his reaction masked by the camouflage pattern of moonlight and darkness, Marvin caught his breath. What makes you think I'm out to get you? Krell laughed, and for a moment Marvin saw a bright blue cataract smashing off a sheet of glass in brilliant sunlight. I heard the look on your face, Krell said. Besides, what makes you think you're the first person that's come here trying to nail me? So why'd you let me come here? Because half the Golden Grove's regulars come here the first time to get their goods on that phony Harry Krell. If I worried about that, I'd lose half my trade. I just can't figure out where your head's at, Krell. What do you think you're doing here? What am I doing? Krell said, an edge of whining bitterness coming into his voice. What do you think I'm doing? I'm surviving as best I can, same as you. You think I asked for this? Sure, a lot of nuts come through here and convince themselves they're getting religious visions off me. A big ecstasy trip, great for them. But for Harry Krell, synesthesia's no ecstasy trip, let me tell you. I can't drive a car, or walk across the street, or go anywhere, or do anything. All I can do is hear pretty colors, smell the music, see the taste of whatever crap I'm eating. After 3 years, I got enough experience to guess pretty well what's happening around me most of the time, as long as I stay on familiar ground. But I'm just guessing, man. I'm trapped inside my own head. Like now, I see something blue-green off to the left, probably the sea. I'm smelling and pink-violet stuff around us, trees, probably eucalyptus. And I hear some kind of gong. There's a moon out, right? If you're saying something now, I can't make it out until I start hearing sound again. Man, I'm so alone here inside this light show. Bill Marvin fought against his own feelings and lost. He couldn't stop himself from feeling sympathy for Harry Krell, locked inside his weird primitive reality, an ordinary slob cut off from an ordinary life. Yet Krell was entirely willing to put other people into the same place. Feeling like that, you still don't mind making your bread by sucking other people in with you? He said. Jesus, Marvin, you're a pornographer.
You give people the kick they want, and you make your living off it. But does it turn you on? How'd you like your whole life to be a pornographic movie? Bill Marvin choked on a wisecrack which never came out, because the deadening quality of what his life had become slammed him in the gut. What is the difference between me and Krell, he thought. He gives the suckers synesthetic flashes and I give him porn. What he's putting out doesn't turn him on any more than what I put out turns me on. We're both alone, inside our heads, and faking it. He got hit on the head by a surfboard and got stuck in the synesthesia trip, and I got hit on the head by Hollywood and got stuck in the porn trip. Sorry to put you on such a bummer, Marvin, Krell said. I can smell it on you. Now I hear your face. What? We're both alike, Krell, Marvin said, and we both stink. We're just doing what we gotta do. You gotta play the cards you've been dealt, because you're not gonna get any others. Sometimes you deal yourself your own lousy hand, Marvin said. I'll show you lousy, said Krell. I'll show you how lousy it can be, to just walk from here to your cabin the way I have to do it. Have you got the guts? That's what I'm paying my money for, Marvin said quietly. He began walking back up the path. Krell turned and walked beside him. Abruptly, the darkness dissolved into a glowing gingerbread fairyland of light. To Marvin's left, where he knew the sea was crashing against the base of the cliffs, he saw a bright green-yellow bank of brilliance that set out pulses of radiance which struck invisible objects all around him, haloing them in the subtle shades of the spectrum, forming an infinitely complex latticework of ever-changing, intersecting wave fronts that transformed itself with every pulse from an auroral sun that was the sea. Beside him, Harry Krell was a shape of darkness outlined in a shimmering aura. He heard a faraway chiming pleasantly in the velvet quiet. He tasted salt and smelled a rapidly changing sequence of floral odors that might have been Krell speaking. The beauty of it all drenched his soul through every pore. He walked slowly along, orienting himself by the supposition that the green-yellow brilliance was the breaking surf, that the areas of darkness outlined by the living lacework of colored wave fronts were solid objects to be avoided. It wasn't easy, but it was somehow enchanting, picking his way through a familiar scene that had transformed itself into a universe of wonder. Then the world changed again. He could hear the crashing of the sea. On his left, he saw a thick blue-green spongy mass, huge and towering. On the ground, the path was a ribbon of blackness through a field of pinkish gray. Here and there, fountains grew out of the pinkish gray, with grayish stems and vivid maroon crests tree-high. He smelled clear coldness. Krell was a doughy mass of colors, dominantly washed-out brown. Marvin guessed that he was seeing smell. It was easy enough to follow the path of dead earth through the fragrant grass. After a while, there was another subtler transformation. He could see that he and Krell were walking up the path towards his cabin, no more than 20 yards away in the silvery moonlight. But his mouth was filled with a now winey, now nutty flavor that ebbed and flowed with an oceanic rhythm, and here and there broken by quick wisps of spiciness as bird shapes flapped from tree to darkened tree. The only sound was a soft, almost subliminal hiss. Dazed, transported, Marvin covered the last few yards to his cabin, open-mouthed and wide-eyed. When they reached the door, the strange taste in his mouth evaporated, and he could hear the muffled grumble of the pounding surf. He laughed, exhilarated, refreshed in every atom of his being, alive to every subtle sensory nuance of the night. "How do you like living where I live?" Krell said sourly. "It's beautiful. It's..." Krell scowled, snickered, and smiled ruefully. "So the big wise guy turns out to be a sucker just like everyone else," he said, almost regretfully. Marvin laughed again. In fact, he realized he had been laughing for the first time in over a week. "Who knows, Krell," he said. "You might enjoy living in one of my pornographic movies." He laughed one more time, then went into his cabin, leaving Krell standing there in the night with a dumb expression on his face. Later, when he got into bed, the cool sheets and the soft pillow were a clear night full of pinpoint bright, multicolored stars, and the darkness smelled like a woman's perfume. The world went livid red, and the wooden slats beneath his naked body became a smoky tang in his mouth. Marvin felt himself glowing in the center of his being like a roaring winter fireplace. Heard Dave Andrews' voice say, "Really sweats the tension out of you." The flash passed, and he was lying on the wooden bench of the sauna shack, bathed in his own luxuriant sweat, baking in the heat given off by the hot stones on their cast-iron rack. The fat, towel-wrapped man on the bench across from him stared sightlessly at the ceiling and sighed. "Phew," said Andrews as his eyes came back into focus. "I could really hear my muscles uncoil. Twong!" Martin lay there, just sucking up the heat, going with it, and entirely ignoring Andrews, who was some kind of land speculator and a crashing bore. He closed his eyes and concentrated on the waves of heat which he could all but feel breaking against his body. The relief of the grain of wood against his skin, the subtle odor of hot stone. He had learned to bask in the world of his senses and let everything else drift by. "I tell you, old Krell may be charging a pretty penny, but it sure cleans out the old tubes and charges up the old batteries." Andrews babbled on like a radio commercial, but Marvin found little trouble in pushing the idiot voice far into the sensory background. It was easy, when each sense could become a universe entire, when your sensorium was no longer conditioned to sight-sound dominance. Suddenly Andrew's voice was gone, and Marvin heard a whistling hurricane wind. Opening his eyes, he saw wispy white billows of ethereal steam, punctuated by the multicolored static of Andrew's words. He tasted something like curry and smelled a piney, convoluted odor. When the flash passed, he got up, slipped on a bathing suit, dashed out of the sauna, ran across the rich green grass in the high blue sunlight, and dove straight into the swimming pool. The cool water hit his superheated body with an orgasmic shock. He floated to the surface and let the little wavelets cradle him on his back as he paddled over to the lip of the pool, where Karen sat, dangling her feet in the water. "You're sure a different man than when we came here," she said. Looking up, Marvin saw her bikinied form as a fuzzy vagueness against a blinding blue sky. "Well, okay, so Krell's got something going for him," he said. "But at these prices he's still a crook, and the funny thing is, he thinks he's an even bigger crook than he really is." She didn't answer for a long moment, but stared into the depths of the pool to one side of him, lost in the universe of her own synesthetic flash. When she finally spoke, it came out as a gusher of glistening green-black oil emerging from soft lavender clouds, while Marvin tasted icy cotton candy, judging from the discord of her face jarring the soothing melody of the sunlit sky. It was probably just as well. Marvin luxuriated in a shower of blood-warm rain, saw a sheen of light that pulsed from sunshine yellow to sea green, then the flash passed. He was sitting on his cushion on Harry Krell's sunny porch, in a circle around Krell, along with Tish, Andrews, and Karen. Strange, he thought. I've been here nearly 3 weeks, and I haven't had a booster group with Karen yet. Stranger still was the realization that this hadn't seemed peculiar or even significant until this moment. Like the rest of the outside world, his former relationship with Karen seemed so long ago and far away. The woman to his right seemed no closer to him emotionally than any of the other residents of Golden Groves, who drifted through each other's private universes like phantom ships passing in the night. Harry Krell took a deep breath, and the vault of the sky became a sheet of gleaming brass. Below, the sea was a rolling cauldron of ebony. The porch itself was outlined in dull blue, and the people around him were throbbing shapes of yellowish pink. To his left, the odor of fading incense. Across the way, rich Havana smoke, and the powerful tinge of ozone pervaded all. But the smell that riveted Marvin's attention was the one on his right, an overwhelming feminine musk that seemed compounded or partially masked by unsubtle perfume, drying nail polish, beauty cream, shampoo, deodorants, and the full spectrum of chemical enhancers, which he now realized had been the characteristic odors of living with Karen. Waves of nostalgia and disgust formed inside him, crested, broke, and merged into a single emotional tone for which there was no word. It was the space that Karen occupied in his mind, the total image through which he experienced her. Another change, and he saw light pulsing from yellow to green once more, tasted a salty tang. From his left he heard the rickety tick of a funky old piano. Across the way, a staccato metallic blatting. Over it all, the brassy, hollow, melancholy wailing of Harry Krell. But once again it was the theme on his right that vibrated a nerve that went straight from his senses, through his brain, and into the pits of his gut. It was as if a gong were striking within an enclosure that rudely dampened its vibrations, slamming the echoing notes back on each other, abruptly amputating the long, slow vibrations, creating a sound that was a hysterical hammering at invisible walls, the sound of an animal caught in some invisible trap. Ironically, the smell of a woodland field in high summer was heavy in Marvin's nostrils. After a few more slow changes, Krell brought them flickering back through the sequences. Blood-warm rain, a sheet of gleaming brass over an ebony sea, the smell of feminine musk and body chemicals, light pulsing from yellow to green, rich Havana smoke, peppermint and red wine, high summer in a woodland field, flat highballs, melancholy wailing, rickety tick. Then Marvin was seated on his cushion next to Karen's, while the sea grumbled to itself below, and Harry Krell breathed heavily and wiped sweat out of his eyes. Marvin and Karen simultaneously looked at each other. Their eyes met, or at least their focal planes intersected. For Marvin, it was like staring straight at two cold green marbles set in the alabaster face of a statue, for all the motion that the eye contact contained. Judging from the ghost of a grimace that quivered across her lips, she was sensing no less of a stranger. For an instant he was blinded by yellow light, sickened by the odor of her chemical musk. When the flash passed, he saw that she was in the throes of one of her own, her eyes staring sightlessly out to sea, her lips twitching, her nostrils flaring. For a moment he was overcome with curiosity as to how she was experiencing him. Then, with a small effort, he put this distasteful thought from his mind, knowing that this was the moment of true divorce, that the alimony was now the only bond that remained between them. A moment later, without a word to each other, they both got up and went their separate ways. As Karen walked through the glass doors into the house, Marvin saw a billowing, spongy green mass, and heard her hysterical trapped hammering beat time for her march out of his life forever. And time became the flickering procession of sheets flashing images. The sun set over the cliffs into the Pacific, now a globe of orange fire dipping into the glassy waters and painting the sky with smears of purple and scarlet. Now the smoky tang of autumn fading into the sharply crystal bite of winter night. Now a slow-motion peal of enormous thunder dying slowly into the velvet stillness. The morning light on the porch of the beach house was a shower of blood-warm rain, a field of orange radiance shot with mists of cool blue, a humming symphony of vibrating energy. For Bill Marvin, these had become the natural poles of existence, the only time reference in a world in which night might be the toasty woman smell of his bedroom darkness, the brilliant starry night of the cool sheets against his body, or the golden light of anonymous female flesh against his, in which day was the coruscating fireworks of food crunching between his teeth, the celestial chime of his hot body hitting the cool water of the pool after the curry flavor of the sauna, the billowing green clouds of the surf breaking against the foot of the cliffs. People floated through this quicksilver wonderland as shifting, elusive constellations of sensory images, rickety-tick piano, chemical female musk, cloud of Havana smoke, the wail of an electric guitar, peppermint and red wine, hysterical, confined gonging, smoked chili peppers, garlic and peptic gall, the melancholy wail of a gypsy violinist playing jazz on a tuba, the sights and sounds and tastes and smells and feels that were the sensory images of the residents of Golden Groves interpenetrated the images of the inanimate world, blending and melding with them until people and things became indistinguishable aspects of the chaotic whole. Marvin's mind, except in isolated moments, consisted entirely of the combination of sensory impulses going through to his brain at any given time. He existed as the confluence of these sensory images. In a sense, he became his sensory experience, no longer time-bound to memory and expectation, no longer a detached point of view sardonically bouncing around inside his own skull. Only in isolated stretches, when his synesthetic flashes were at momentary ebbs, did he step outside his own immediate experience, wonder at the strangeness in his own mind, watch himself moving through the trees and cabins and people of Golden Groves like some kind of automaton. At these times he felt a certain vague sense of loss. He could not tell whether it was sadness at his temporary fall from a more sublime mental state, or whether his ordinary everyday consciousness was mourning its own demise. One morning, when the granola in his mouth had scattered jeweled images of sparkling beads as he crunched it against a coffee backdrop of brown velvet, Harry Krell held him back as he started to walk out onto the porch for his morning booster session. "This is day 30 for you, Marvin," Krell said. Marvin stared back at him dumbly, hearing a hollow brassy wail, seeing a rectangle of bright orange outlined against a deep blue. "I said this is the last day you've paid for. Either you pony up another $500 or send for someone to take you back to L.A. You won't be in any shape to drive for about a week." Marvin's sensorium had changed again. He was standing in the cool living room near the open glass doors, through which sunlight seemed to extend in a solid chunk. 30 days, he said dazedly. Has it been 30 days? I've lost count. Lord, he thought. I was only supposed to be here a week or two. I haven't done any work in a month. I must be nearly broke, and the alimony payment is past due. My God, 30 days. I can hardly remember them at all. Well, I've kept good count, said Krell. You've used up your $500, and this is no charity operation. Marvin found his mind racing madly like some runaway machine, trying futilely to catch up with a world that had passed it by, desperately trying to sink itself back in gear with the real world of bank statements, alimony courts, 4-day shooting schedules, rubber checks, vice squad hassles, recalcitrant actresses, greasy backers. If I can cast something in 3 or 4 days, maybe I can use the same cast to shoot 3 quickies back to back. But I'll have to scout 3 different locations or it won't work. That should give me enough money to cover the monthly nut and keep Karen's lawyers off my back if I get all the money up front, pay them first and kite checks until... Well, Marvin, you want to write out another $500 check or... What? Marvin grunted. Another? No, hell, I'm broke. I've already been here I've got to get back to LA immediately. Well, maybe I'll see you around again sometime, said Harry Krell. He walked into the brilliant mass of sunlight, leaving Marvin standing alone in the shadowed living room. And as he did, Marvin saw a brilliant pulse of sunshine yellow, heard an ominous chime, and felt a terrible pang of paradise lost. But there was no time to sort his head out. He had to call Earl Day, his regular cameraman, get him to come out and drive him back to Los Angeles in the Targa. They could put together 3 concepts on the way in. Start casting tomorrow, have some money in 4 or 5 days. Gotta make up for lost time fast. For the barest moment, Bill Marvin was enveloped in rainbow fire, which sputtered and crackled like color TV snow. And he heard the unzipping, syncopated whooshing of metal birds soaring past his ears, igniting phantom traces of memories almost forgotten after the frantic madness of grinding out 3 pornies in less than a month, slowing his racing metabolism, catching for a fleeting instant his psychic breath. Then he was back, stiff-spined in the driver's seat of his Porsche, his hands gripping the wheel like spastic claws, the engine growling at his back, barreling down the left lane of the Ventura Freeway at 75 miles per hour in moderate traffic. The flash had come and gone so quickly that he hadn't even had time to feel any sense of danger, unlike the first time he had tried to drive, only 5 days out of Golden Groves, when he nearly creamed out as the road became a sharp melody through rumbling drums up in the twisty Hollywood hills. Now the synesthetic flashes were few, maybe 1 or 2 a day, and so transient that they weren't much more dangerous behind the wheel than a strong sneeze. Each one slipped through his mind like a ghost, leaving only a peculiar echo of vague sadness. The first couple weeks of production, on the other hand, had been a real nightmare. Up until 10 days ago, he had been flashing every half hour or so, and strongly enough so that he hadn't been able to do his own driving, so that takes had been ruined when he tripped out in the middle of them, so that the actors and crew sometimes thought he was stoned or flipping and tried to take advantage of it. Fortunately, he had made so many pornies by now that he could just about do it in his sleep. The worst of it had been that making the films was so boring that he found himself actually waiting for the synesthetic flashes, concentrating on them when they came, even trying to anticipate them and experiencing the actual work as something unreal, as marking time. He was never much interested in sex when he was shooting porn. After treating female bodies like meat all day, it was pretty hard to get turned on by them at night. And the only time he had really felt alive was when he was flashing or involved in one of the 100 of horrible hassles. He made an abrupt 3-lane jump and pulled off the freeway at Laurel Canyon Boulevard, drove across the ticky-tacky of San Fernando Valley, began climbing up into the Hollywood Hills. The valley side of the hills was just more flatland-style suburban plastic. But once more across Mulholland Drive, which ran along their major ridgeline, Laurel Canyon Boulevard curved and wound down towards Sunset Strip, following an old dry streambed through a deep gorge that cut through overgrown and twisted hills festooned with weird and half-hidden houses. A scene from some Disney Black Forest elf cartoon. Usually Marvin got a big lift out of leaving the dead plastic landscape of lowland Los Angeles for the shadowy, urbanized yet countrified world of the canyon. Usually he got a tremendous emotional surge out of having finished one film, let alone 3, driving away from it all on the last day of cutting, with any one of the dozen readily available girls already waiting at the house for him to start a week-long lost weekend, reward for a job well done. But this time the drive home did nothing for him. The end of the final cutting only left him empty and stale, and he hadn't even bothered to have a girl waiting for him at the house. He felt tapped out, bugged, emotionally flat, and the worst of it was that he didn't know why. He pulled into his carport and walked around the side of his house into the seclusion of the unkept, overgrown garden. Even the wild, lush vegetation of his private hillside seemed washed out, pallid, and somehow unreal. The bird sounds in the trees and underbrush seemed like so much muzak. He kicked irritably at a rock, then heard the phone ringing in the house. He went inside, plopped down on the black leather director's chair by the phone, picked up the living room extension, and grunted, "Yeah?" It was Wally Bruner. "What's going on, Bill? I haven't heard from you in nearly 2 months, ever since you started in on that matter we discussed. I heard you'd started shooting 3 weeks ago, so I knew you weren't dead, but why haven't you gotten in touch with me? Did you get what you went there for?" Marvin stared out at the picture window into the garden, where the late afternoon sunlight cast shadows across scraggly patches of lawn under 2 big eucalyptus trees. 2 dun-colored mourning doves had ventured out of their wooded seclusion to nibble at seeds in the grass and gobble moodily to themselves like dowager aunts. "What are you talking about, Wally?" Marvin said vacantly. "Damn it, you know. Golden Groves. Harry Krell. Are we ready to proceed?" Suddenly, glowing bubbles of pastel shimmer were drifting languidly up through a viscous wine-colored liquid, and Marvin smelled the sweet aroma of perfect sunset just for the tantalizing fraction of a moment, and then it was gone. Marvin sighed, blinked, smiled. "Forget it, Wally," he said. "I'm dropping the whole thing." "What? Why on earth?" "Let's just say that I went up on a mountain, came down, and want to make sure it's still there." "What the hell are you talking about, Bill?" "What the vintners buy," said Marvin. "Bill, you sound like you've flipped." "I'm okay," Marvin said. "Let's just say that I don't give a damn what Karen spends her alimony on, as long as I have to pay it and leave it at that, okay?" "Okay, Bill. That's the advice I gave you in the first place." After he hung up on Bruner, Marvin sat there, looking out in his garden, where ordinary dun-colored birds were pecking at a scruffy lawn, and the subtle gray tinge of smog was barely apparent in the waning light. He sighed once, shuddered, shrugged, sighed again. Then he picked up the phone and dialed the number of Golden Groves.